Please don't forget the money, man.
All my blessings, 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 all my blessings.
I need my blessings every penny, daily counting every single one. I'm seeing plenty. Level up and watch that beat turn into.
And here we go, the big dog Saturday, September 4th, this Saturday, starting with the noon slate. That's Eastern time, of course. It's a little bit later with the games on Thursday and Friday and a much bigger back end of the schedule in the afternoon and evening. But some of the highlights include East Carolina hosting number 13 NC State on ESPN. Now the Pirates out of the AAC, and they'll be switching conferences soon. I can't remember where exactly, but they returned most of their starters and made a bowl game last year for the first time in 8 or 9 years. Quarterback Holton Adlers will be back. He threw for over 3,100 yards, almost 62% completion percentage, 18-10 touchdown to interception ratio. Not excellent, but a veteran leader there. Keaton Mitchell rushed for over 1,100 yards and 9 touchdowns with a 6.5 yards per carry average last year. The metrics loved what the defense was doing, and a lot of those guys are back for a Pirates team that is currently only an 11.5-point underdog to the NC State Wolfpack. Now, I love NC State. If you listen to my top 25 rankings on the year, they have a veteran quarterback in Devin Leary, who was thrown for over 3,400 yards and 35-5 touchdown to interception ratio last season. He should be on NFL radars if he continues to have an excellent year this season. Defense led by the linebacking core is going to be very threatening, and this team returned a lot of starters from a team that was a couple of ball bounces away from being a one-loss, possibly playoff conversation type of team. And they'll have that opportunity again this season. But first, they will have to get past the Pirates. So this could be a very interesting game. Greenville, North Carolina is the home campus of East Carolina, and that's where this game will be held. So an interstate rivalry. Clemson comes up here pretty quick to open conference play for NC State, but first they will have to take care of the Pirates. But this is one of the better watches on the noon slate. The other one would be Appalachian State hosting North Carolina. Now, North Carolina obviously had a slow start against Florida A&M from the FCS level that only had 3/4 of the roster available to play for the Week 0 game. But Drake May looked excellent, throwing for 5 or 6 touchdown passes. But staying in North Carolina here, Boone, North Carolina, the campus of Appalachian State, this will be another tough game. Right now the line is 1.5 in North Carolina's favor. This is a noon ESPNU game to see if North Carolina can slow down this Appalachian State team. They'll be favored to win the Sun Belt Conference, and they'll be top units on both sides of the ball for Appalachian State. Quarterback Chase Bryce is back for the Mountaineers. Over 3,300 yards last season, 27 touchdowns. Nate Knowles back at running back, over 1,100 yards, only 4 touchdowns, but 5.7 yards per carry. Cameron Peoples also returns at running back, 14 touchdowns, 926 yards, 5.6 yards per carry there. They will be running the ball a lot. They're also, surprisingly, one of the more efficient passing offenses as well. They might be figuring some things out defensively, so we might see some points given up by both squads, as we saw North Carolina give up several touchdowns to the Rattlers last week. But this is a senior-led team, and it would not be surprising if the Mountaineers upset the Tar Heel apple cart here in the official Week 1, but Game 2 of the season for the Tar Heels. Now, the rest of the noon, early afternoon slate is pretty weak. Michigan, ranked number 8, will be hosting Colorado State. Cade McNamara will be starting at quarterback. Next week, J.J. McCarthy will be starting at quarterback against Hawaii. That is official from Harbaugh. He came out with a statement and said he'll be giving each quarterback a start to begin the season, kind of treating it as a preseason opportunity, it seems like, against these weaker competitions. Colorado State's had its good years. This does not appear to be one of them. Hawaii, of course, struggled last week against Vanderbilt, getting absolutely crushed by 6 touchdowns was the spread there. And they're doing a complete rebuild after a coaching change there. But they will get them next week after knocking off Colorado State this Saturday. Number 6, Texas A&M will be hosting Sam Houston from the SCS level on the SEC network. Haynes King will officially be the starting quarterback after 2 or 3 names were in the running there. He did start for 2 games last year before getting knocked out with an injury and sidelined for the rest of the season. So he's clearly talented enough to beat out Miles, Brennan, the transfer from LSU, and a number of other high recruits there. So it'll be interesting to see if he can really move the offense. Again, this is one of the slowest moving offensive units in the country. Jimbo Fisher takes his time with it. They don't throw a lot of big passes down the field. So it'd be nice to see a quarterback that can really push the pace here and open up this offense that has a lot of high-level recruits, and to really see them move in the ways that Alabama does and the way that Nick Saban decided to augment his offense when he saw how things were going to go as far as spreading things out and operating in space and moving up tempo a little bit. So it'd be nice to see Texas A&M and Jimbo Fisher do the same if he could find real talent at the quarterback position that he probably hasn't had since Jameis Winston back at Florida State. I'm sorry, but 3 or 4 seasons of Kellen Mond didn't quite move the needle. Also at noon, Iowa will be hosting South Dakota State. The Jackrabbits, not to be confused with the 17-time national champions North Dakota, the Bison, but South Dakota State, they'll be heading to Iowa. That's on FS1 at noon. Iowa's offense figures to be about as exciting this season as it was last. It'll be somewhere between watching paint dry and grass grow, but the defense figures to reload and be effective again on that side of the ball. Maryland and Tulia Tagovailoa take on Buffalo on the Big Ten Network. Also at noon, that passing offense figures to be one of the best, may even be the second best, right behind that loaded Ohio State offense in the Big Ten. Tagovailoa had 3,860 yards, 328 completions, 26 touchdowns, and 69.2% completion percentage, along with 7 300-yard passing games last season, all single-season Maryland records. They leaned on him heavily, passing the ball on the offensive side, really leaning away from the run. But on the other side, the passing defense was one of the worst in the country. So that'll again probably be the Achilles heel for the Terrapins this year, but they are opening up against Buffalo and figured to put up a lot of points again this season. Rutgers will be heading to Boston College on the ACC network in an ACC Big Ten crossover. The Eagles are still flown by Filip Jerkovic, who had NFL buzz last season before getting chopped down a few games in. Passing defense was surprisingly 3rd best in the country and returns a lot of its starters, so they figure to be good in the back end again. Greg Schiano was in year 3 of a second stint at Rutgers and hoping for an early win here to build towards bowl eligibility. Virginia will be hosting Richmond, the Spiders, on ESPN3 at 12:30. Virginia has question marks pretty much everywhere, but will throw the ball like Maryland pretty much all the time. 40-plus times a game, maybe. Brennan Armstrong, who passed for almost 4,500 yards and 31 touchdowns on a 65.5% completion percentage last year, allows them to do so and stay in any game against any team, just like he did last season for the Cavaliers. That again, 12:30 ESPN3, Virginia hosting Richmond. Finally at 1 o'clock, an Air Force team that, taking out the 2020 year where they went 3-3, won 10 games last year and 11 in 2019, has been one of the top defenses in the country, has been, of course, one of the best rushing attacks for several years. They return a whole bunch of starters and will be on pace again to win double-digit games this season. They will be hosting Northern Iowa. Again, that's 1 o'clock. There is not a network at the time that I'm recording listed, but that's the only other game of note in the early noon slot. Again, that's Eastern time. Now let's hit on our mid-afternoon games where we're finally starting to get some juice. First of all, in time that they will be airing on TV. At 2 o'clock, you'll get to see Iowa State hosting Southeast Missouri State at the FCS level. Iowa State had a lot of returning production last year, and it did not show on the football field. There's a lot of teams that are expected to compete for a open Big 12 this year, but Iowa State is not one of them. They're going to try and rebound, and they will open up against the gimme game here. That'll be on the Big 12 and ESPN Plus networks at 2:30. UCLA will be hosting Bowling Green on the Pac-12 network. Dorian Thomas-Robinson has been there for what seems like 20 years under Chip Kelly, who has also seemed like he's been there for a very long time with mediocre results. But this team should sleepwalk into an 8-4 record, even if they're not very competitive last year, sort of like they did last year, as well as Arizona State. Both teams roll up to 8-9 wins, munching on a Pac-12 conference where half the teams didn't do very well, ended up losing records. And both teams, I think, each had 1 or 2 wins over teams with winning records, while compiling 8-4, 9-5 records themselves. So, UCLA lost a lot of production, but they brought in a number of big transfers. Again, Dorian Thomas-Robinson back at quarterback. A lot expected from UCLA this year. Some think that they'll be a sleeper team, even though Utah, USC, and Oregon are still in the mix there. UCLA will get it opened up here against Bowling Green. Now, 3:30 is our prime time slot. In a supposedly neutral site game in Atlanta, Georgia, number 3 Georgia will be hosting number 11 Oregon on ABC. That's the primetime game that you'll be getting all the advertisements for on television and your streaming services. That's one of the big games of the day. The other one will be number 19 Arkansas hosting number 23 Cincinnati on ESPN. Those will be your 2 big games in this slot. Now, Georgia's favored by 17 points right now in this game. Oregon's coming in with the over-under set right around 8.5 for win total on the season. It's a very different year for them. Mario Cristobal obviously left and took the job in Miami. And Daniel Lanning, who was the defensive coordinator for Georgia last year, took the head coaching job here at Oregon. Last year, they did, of course, win double-digit games. They won 10 of them, 10-4 record, but they did get slaughtered by Utah twice in a 3-week span last year to end the season and get knocked out of the playoff picture, out of the Big 12, Pac-12 championship game, and really fall apart. Of course, they beat Ohio State in Columbus earlier in the season, and that was really their only staple win, albeit a big one, on the season, as the team has really not looked like a championship contender really since Marcus Mariota was there 8 years ago at this point. So it's been a tough sledding for the Ducks, all things considered, and this looks like another rough year. Bo Nix is transferring over from Auburn. He's had mixed results, but he's also had a different offensive coordinator every single year he was there. They should be strong in the trenches, particularly on the offensive line where every starter returns. But their top rusher transferred out to USC in the great exodus of players who wanted to move out to Southern California to play for Lincoln Riley. So it's going to be a very interesting experience as a Duck fan this year when you're not favored to win 10 games on the dot and be in the thick of things. They very well could be, or it could be a very different experience this season. As for Georgia, it seems like a simple copy-paste from last year. You lost most of your starters on defense, but you reloaded again with 5 stars who have continued to roll in the past several recruiting classes. Stetson Bennett is back again. Is he a real ceiling raiser in the grand scheme of things? No, not really, but he'll have 5 stars at the skills positions around him. So will this offense be able to take a step forward and really make a big difference if the defense doesn't immediately meet the level that it was last year when it was holding people to around 10 points a game and shutting them down? I don't really know, and you don't know exactly where the Ducks are going to be. So this is going to be an interesting opening game, especially with Daniel Lanning being with the Georgia Bulldogs not that long ago in the national championship game before taking the job. So 17-point spread is quite large, and this game may very well be a blowout, but it could also be just a low-scoring slugfest as both teams working through new personnel and players in new positions And I don't know. We won't know what's going to happen until this game, until we see these teams hit the field. Obviously, it's a new season, a new week, but it's just going to be very interesting to see what happens when these two actually hit the field. Now, Arkansas shouldn't be that much different. KJ Jefferson was a top-rate quarterback in the SEC last year. He'll be throwing the ball all over the place again. The defense was excellent, but this team was just above 500 and could very well be that way again. The schedule's absolutely loaded, and that's in part thanks to the Cincinnati game here this upcoming afternoon. Now, Cincinnati does not have a starting quarterback. Fickell has declined to name one. It is an open competition, or has been an open competition, I should say. Might still be at this point. I guess we don't really know. Between Ben Bryant, who has backed up a Ritter for the last couple years, and sophomore Evan Prater. So one of those two, maybe both of those two, will be hitting the field on Saturday afternoon. Now, obviously, this team lost a lot of picks in the back end to the NFL, but this is one of the few non-Power 5 schools that's able to pull in Power 5 level recruits, thanks to Fickell and what he's been able to do at this school. So this game is currently 6.5 in Arkansas's favor, but this is my top watch of this upcoming Saturday, simply because Georgia is such an overwhelming favorite against Oregon, and I very well expect them to win that game. And we'll get to the night slate in a minute and the full breakdown of my picks for a number of different categories at the end of the pod here. But I think this is my top watch game for Saturday. A win for Cincinnati would be huge. They're going to be favored through the rest of their regular season schedule, really regardless of who's quarterback, and a number of different issues just because of the talent and the coaching staff and the pieces that they're already bringing back and the difference in talent level from the rest of the AAC. They would meet presumably Houston, although this is a long way down the road. Houston in the conference championship game, they are tremendously talented, and this could be possibly set up for another playoff run, but it starts here against the Arkansas Razorbacks, who in themselves have a very difficult schedule, and if they want to make any noise on a national level, this would be a good first step, although they'll have plenty of opportunities. The Arkansas Razorbacks are one of my top teams to watch week in and week out. I did that top 10 list on an earlier podcast because of the number of great teams they play, KJ Jefferson being a top quarterback and all the playmakers that they have on both sides of the football. Speaking of Houston, they are ranked 23rd, and they'll be playing at the exact same time, staying in that 3:30 time slot. They'll be playing UTSA, University of Texas, San Antonio, on the CBS Sports Network, and this spread is 4 points right now, notably because the Roadrunners won double-digit games last year. They returned Frank Harris at quarterback, their top 3 receivers, who are all seniors, most of the offensive line, if not the entire thing, and this is going to be a high-scoring unit. Houston might have one of the better offenses in the entire country as well, with Tune back at quarterback and 2 top receivers. So this could be a high-scoring affair. But Houston could have a hiccup early, not able to keep up with the Roadrunners. So this is low-key a really great game, a really great watch. It's kind of a bummer that it's at the same time as Oregon, Georgia, and Cincinnati, Arkansas, 2 non-Power 5 programs here. Also in the 3:30 time slot on CBS proper, we have Arizona at San Diego State. Of course, at a little bit lower scale here, Arizona was 1-11 last season and lost 4 games by a possession, so they were a little bit closer to having a few more wins there. They're 1-23 in the past 24 games, but Jed Fish is in his second full season with a top 20 recruiting class and Jaden DeLora transferring in from Washington State at quarterback. It's not terribly exciting, but it leaves room for an interesting game. At San Diego State, they'll be heavily favored, having made it to the Mountain West Championship game last season and racking up double-digit wins 5 of the past 6 seasons. So a non-Power 5 school favored over a Power 5 school, and it'd be an upset if it went the other way. Other teams on the slate, Oklahoma will be hosting UTEP, a big spread on that one, but it'll be the first look at Brent Venables moving over from defensive coordinator at Clemson, taking a head coaching job. Dylan Gabriel transferring over from Central Florida at quarterback. He will be reunited with his original offensive coordinator from a few years back in Florida. Marvin Mims will give him a big play option right off the bat. This offense will move up tempo, and we'll see how the defense does, kind of moving over with Brent Venables from Clemson. But they'll be hosting the UTEP Miners. That's on Fox. Other games, we'll get to see the first look of the number 16 Miami Hurricanes on the ACC network. They're hosting Bethane Cookman from the FCS level. Of course, Tyler Van Dyke will be taking over as full-time starting quarterback, and Mario Cristobal there taking over as head coach coming over from Oregon. First look at the Hurricanes. Nebraska will be on the Big Ten network. They're hosting North Dakota from the FCS level. They'll get a chance to kind of rebound from last week's Illinois loss. And at a smaller scale here, Marshall will be hosting Norfolk State on ESPN3, and Wyoming will be hosting Tulsa on FS1. Those two not really as exciting. At 4 o'clock, number 21, Ole Miss will be on the SEC network. They will be hosting the Troy Trojans. Of course, they will have a new quarterback in. That has not yet been decided, but it will hopefully be Jackson Dart, who played a little time as a true freshman last year at USC. He's since transferred out once Lincoln Riley rolled over to that neck of the woods and brought Caleb Williams with him. But former 5-star Luke Altmaier, who played 5 games in place of Matt Corral, is in the mix there as well. Again, that offense will be looking to move up tempo as we saw last year, although there's some doubts in whether they can replicate the double-digit wins. Again, that program spent multiple weeks bouncing in and out of and around a top 10 ranking, if you remember last year. And we're not sure what we're going to get from that program this year, but they're ranked 21st right now on the SEC network, 4 o'clock, playing Troy. Also in the 4 o'clock time slot, South Florida will be hosting number 25 BYU. That's on ESPNU. A lot expected from the Cougars this season. They're second in the country in returning production. Almost everybody comes back from that team, who's playing a brutal schedule, including Notre Dame in Las Vegas in a couple months. That'll be a fun game to watch in the new Raiders Stadium there. But they'll first have to knock out a Southern Florida Bulls team that went 2-10 last year, and will bring in transfer quarterback Gary Bohannon from Baylor, who had lost his starting job. He did well for the Bears last season, but was uprooted by Blake Shappen, who got a couple games in towards the end of the year, and he'll be starting here for the Bulls. Now, not much is expected from this team, and this is actually going to be one of the easier games on the slate for the BYU Cougars, but they will have to go on the road here for the opener and win in Florida. So a loaded afternoon slate. Let's move on to our evening games. Starting at 6 o'clock, you'll get your first look at the number 14 USC Trojans, Caleb Williams, Addison Ray. Nope, Jordan Addison. Wrong Addison there. Coming over from Pittsburgh, the top receiver in the country last season. And so that'll give Caleb Williams an instant target there. So we should see this offense roll. They'll be hosting Rice. That'll be on the Pac-12 network. So unfortunately, a good chunk of the country won't actually get to flip that game on and watch them put up, 60 points on our poor little Rice team here. But on ESPN Plus, Ohio will be hosting Florida Atlantic, a nice little MAC Conference USA crossover there. And James Madison will be hosting Middle Tennessee as well on ESPN Plus. It is their debut at the FBS level. The big game in the 7 o'clock time slot now will be Florida hosting number 7 Utah on ESPN. Anthony Richardson is in his second year in the swamp. He has kicked out Emory Jones, who's transferred out to Arizona State now, and he has full control of that offense. And they were splitting time last year at that quarterback position. He can throw, he can run. Will he do it against the top defense? I guess we'll see. But the swamp will be crazy, be riled up there. Utah, the favorite to win the Pac-12, although you can get great odds on USC as well. But Utah is the most complete team with Cam Rising at quarterback. Billy Napier has got a number of defensive pieces here. He was great over at Louisiana, part of the Sun Belt Conference, and he's got a top 10 or 5 recruiting class shaping up for next year. So he's already making an imprint there in Florida. We'll see if he can knock off Utah at 7 o'clock on ESPN. If that will be a great game. Could see a top 10 team going down early, or could see Utah winning a big game against an SEC opponent, although they're not ranked, and starting to make a move that could put them on a path to potentially make the playoffs. This could be a big early indicator of the direction each team is headed. Staying in that 7 o'clock slot, number 10 Baylor, the Baylor Bears, will be hosting Albany at the FCS level again. Big 12, ESPN networks there. Number 18 Wisconsin, another FCS school, Illinois State on FS1. Wisconsin has the fewest number of starters returning in the Big Ten Conference, but Brandon Allen, who was a true freshman last year, logged 20-plus touchdowns on the ground for the Badgers and will be running behind an experienced offensive line. We're in year 3 of Graham Mertz at the quarterback position. The best game he ever played was the very first one as a true freshman almost 3 years ago, and he's looked horrific ever since. It's too bad, but I believe he's on his 3rd offensive coordinator now, or 3rd quarterback coach, one or the other. He's been horrific, and they haven't benched him. So they really need better quarterback play if they hope to do much better than what they're doing. And if you're happy with double-digit wins and 2nd or 3rd place in the West, then they're going to keep chugging along. Kentucky is ranked 20th. They're hoping to log double-digit wins for the 2nd year in a row. Will Levis, the quarterback, is on NFL radars, so keep an eye for him. They will be playing Miami of Ohio, who will be a frisky team out of the MAC conference. That is on ESPN Plus and the SEC networks, which means no one's going to see him play, basically. On the same collection there, ESPN Plus and SEC networks, the Auburn Tigers, who have named TJ Finley the first player to get an NIL deal with Amazon as their starting quarterback. He played 5 games last season as a starter and went 2-3. They'll be playing Mercer at the FCS level. Also, Vanderbilt will be hosting Elon, so make sure to rush to your television for that one. ESPN Plus and Big 12 Network will have Kansas State hosting South Dakota. Again, another FCS level school, but Kansas State could be a little bit of a surprise here in the Big 12. So we will get our first look here, even if it's not quality competition. The defense looks solid. They have former Nebraska quarterback Adrian Martinez checking in. They have a great running back in Deuce Vaughn, and this team will be able to do a lot on both sides of the ball. This game won't be the most challenging for them, but we will be talking Wildcats in weeks upcoming. Liberty will be on the road at Southern Miss on ESPN Plus. The Liberty Flames will be replacing Malik Willis, who's moved on to the Tennessee Titans, but that could still be a good quality squad there under Hugh Freeze. And the only other 7 o'clock game that's really worth mentioning is Coastal Carolina hosting Army. Army is expected to struggle a bit this season, but it's never a dumpster fire. So they should still put a quality product on the field. And Coastal Carolina's welcoming back Grayson McCall again. He's still viewed as one of the best quarterbacks at the college level. At this point in his career, he's completed 71% of his passes for over 5,300 yards and a 54-6 touchdown to interception ratio. This team has lost a lot of production since last year, but as long as he's healthy, their talent level will be above the other teams in the Sun Belt Conference outside of Appalachian State, maybe Louisiana with the remnants that Billy Napier was able to recruit there, and they will be in the hunt in that conference. So this game will be tucked away on ESPN Plus, unfortunately, but Coastal Carolina hosting Army, not a bad under-the-radar watch here. Unfortunately, it's going to get buried along with a number of other games here. Besides Florida-Utah, we have Mississippi State and the first look back at Mike Leach and Will Rogers' high-flying offense. They'll be hosting Memphis, who struggled a little bit the past couple of years out of the AAC, but they will get a chance to host the Tigers on ESPNU at 7:30. Again, I have Mississippi State as one of the most entertaining teams to watch this year, whether that yields great results as far as a win-loss record. I don't think that'll be the case, but this team has a lot of talent. There's a lot of buzz around what they can do on both sides of the ball and who Leach has been able to recruit here. And I think they'll destroy the Tigers, but it'll be the first look at what they'll be able to do at decent competition. On ESPN Plus and the SEC Network Plus, again, is a game that may slowly start to pop up on the other networks as a possible upset or a close game, and that's the South Carolina Gamecocks out of the SEC hosting Georgia State out of the Sun Belt. Georgia State's recruited some good talent, and they've been a solid team for the most part since they've bumped up from the FCS to the FBS, the highest level here. And they've been a productive team. They'll be great on defense, and they have some all-conference players on both sides of the ball. South Carolina will be welcoming in Spencer Rattler, and we'll see if he's a difference maker at quarterback for this team. But that game is very under the radar in terms of what the result could actually be. Could certainly be Georgia State pulling that one out. We also have Texas hosting Louisiana Monroe. That'll be in the Longhorn Network. Texas Tech will be hosting Murray State at the FCS level. Stanford will be hosting Colgate at the FCS level. North Texas will be hosting SMU on the CBS Sports Network. A couple teams going at it there from Conference USA and the AAC, the American Conference. But those are kind of lower level games there. And finally, Syracuse will be hosting Louisville on the AAC Network. Now, why is this worth mentioning at all? Syracuse is no good, and why would I ever want to watch the Orangemen? Well, you're not wrong. Syracuse may be absolutely horrific this year, and they're going to be struggling to make a bowl game. But they have one of the best running backs in the country by the name of Sean Tucker. And he managed to have the number 1 ACC rushing offense this year, thanks to his lead, and number 16 nationally, which were a few of the bright spots for the Orangemen, although they did end up with a top 30 defense overall. But I think that was more indicative of some of the offenses they played in the ACC. He rolled up just under 1,500 yards and 12 touchdowns at 6.1 yards per carry, and he will again be the focal point of the offense for the Orangemen. On the other side, Malik Cunningham has been a quarterback at Louisville so long that when he started, he overlapped with Lamar Jackson in his last year with the Cardinals, and he has a similar playing style. He's a runner and a thrower of the football and very electric when he does so. Great watch on television. His top receivers have transferred out, but he should still have plenty of weapons there. This team has hovered right around 500 for the last few years. That's why they haven't been ranked, haven't been on any big radars, but they should still be able to produce one of the better offenses in the ACC that has a lot of teams struggling to come up with it at times. And have a great opponent in Syracuse here as far as a top player, Sean Tucker, on that side of the ball. And they present a decent problem with the back end of the defense. The secondary is decent as well. So two teams that may again be hovering around 500 in the grand scheme of things, that may not match up against Clemson or Pittsburgh or possibly Wake Forest or some of the other teams that are at the top of the ACC. But there's surprise potential this year, especially for Louisville if they're able to get some wins under their belt this season. And if they're playing each other here early, it's a great way to keep an eye on some of the key players and Electric College guys here, 8 o'clock on the ACC network. Alabama will also be hosting Utah State. The Aggies played last week and they struggled against Austin Peay, so that's not a great look. I thought they might be able to hang with Alabama for 5 or 6 minutes here before the Tide washed them away, but it looks like that may not be the case. They're not quite the same as last season, although maybe week 0 was an anomaly. But they did win the Mountain West Conference last season. But the SEC Network, you'll be able to watch number 1 Alabama host Utah State, the Aggies. That's 7:30. And the prime game where College Game Day will be, and they'll be hosting the first big College Game Day of the season, is number 2 Ohio State hosting number 5 Notre Dame. That's on ABC, 7:30. Now the spread on this is currently 17 points. Marcus Freeman, the new head coach of Notre Dame, stepping into that role from a coordinator position with Brian Kelly moving to LSU, has stated that he will use that for billboard material, and we will see what happens because he is not named a starting quarterback yet, as they're filling a number of new roles on that Notre Dame team. But it seems like every year they finish in the top 10, and they're always replacing a number of different pieces. It's been several years since they've had a locked-in number one starter, and that wasn't a transfer coming in at the quarterback position, and they're looking for a new one again this season. But number 5, and of course they were ripped apart now in a number of different media circles for being ranked that high, playing North Carolina, USC, this Ohio State game. But I think it's possible that they push for double-digit wins again. I'm not sure that will happen here. So a lot of question marks all up and down the roster for Notre Dame, although the recruiting class looked nice and has been for a few years here. Expect them to be good in the trenches, run the ball. We'll see what happens. Ohio State is going to be throwing the ball all over the yard. They averaged almost 8 yards per play last season, which was number 1 in the country by a mile, almost 45 points per game, and they'll be doing it again this season. Jackson Smith-Njigba exploded, finished at a top of number of different categories, almost 1,600 yards, 17 yards per catch, 9 touchdowns. Marvin Harris Jr. is starting to look like his father, according to reports, and is looking like the next great receiver in a never-ending line here for the Buckeyes. C.J. Stroud, of course, 4,400 yards last season, 44-6 touchdown and interception ratio, over a 71% completion percentage. Travion Henderson, the true sophomore running back, went for over 1,200 yards, almost 7 yards a carry, and 15 touchdowns. The defense was gashed on the other side of the ball, but Jim Knowles comes over from Oklahoma State to kind of fix that up. And they certainly have the talent on that side of the ball, so it seems like if you're able to kind of coach that up a little bit, that they'll be very, very dangerous. So this game, again, is sitting right around 17 points and has been, so it may not be terrible that this game's at the same time as Florida-Utah. We'll give you options to channel flip should it get too out of control. And finally, our late night slate never disappoints, really. We have one top slated game at 10:30. That's Boise State heading to Oregon State on ESPN. The Broncos had a rough season last year, 7-6. Oregon State, rough season last year, 7-6. I only say that because they started 4-1 and faded down the stretch after that. But the Beavers rebuilding project kind of continues in year 5 with Jonathan Smith there. They're returning Chance Nolan, there we go, at quarterback. And that team's going to try and move forward with a fair amount of returning players. And Boise State will try to bounce back to a double-digit win type of team behind their running back, who's really been their strength. That's George Holani. I haven't been real impressed with their quarterback, Hank Bachmeier, but he's a senior now. Maybe we'll see some results there. Anyways, that's a decent late-night game in the 10:30 slot. We also have Washington State hosting Idaho at the FCS level on the Pac-12 network at 9:30, should you get that. Washington, who's rebuilding after a horrific season last year where they were expected to be possibly a part of the national conversation, certainly a part of the Pac-12 race, but bottomed out at 4-8. They'll be hosting Kent State on FS1. And finally, at midnight, we get the good old Hawaii Rainbow Warriors trying to bounce back after the Vanderbilt bludgeoning last week. And they'll be hosting Western Kentucky and that high-flying passing offense. It's going to be a little bit more balanced game here. We could have a lot of points late on the island. Sunday on this Labor Day weekend, we have a standalone game on ABC at 7:30. The LSU Tigers will be hosting the FSU Seminoles. Brian Kelly's debut in Death Valley, and it's going to be an interesting show, that's for sure, between two programs of power trying to return to that state as they've been in flux recently. The LSU Tigers have just shy of 30 transfers and new players in that program. Presumably the starting quarterback is going to be Jaden Daniels, who's coming in from Arizona State, but we don't know And only a handful of starters actually returned from last year's team that was constantly burned in the secondary and just had all kinds of problems. Of course, a lot of players onto the NFL as well. The strength is going to be in the front seven, particularly the defensive line for this group. Star receiver Keyshawn Butt will be back, all SEC player, so he will be there to kind of help the offense there, be the star of the show. But a lot of question marks for the LSU Tigers, who are favored by a field goal at this moment in time. And Florida State did play their opener last week against Duquesne, and the run game was really all the noise there. Ward had 14 attempts for 127 yards and 2 touchdowns. Benson had 11 carries for 105 and a touchdown. Toafel had 13 carries for 101 and a touchdown. Hill had 9 for 55 and a touchdown. So a pretty nice distribution between 4 running backs, 3 of them going over 100 yards, and 4 touchdowns combined there. 4 touchdowns for each of them. Jordan Davis, the quarterback, was modest, 11 for 15 for 200 yards, 73% completion percentage. He's good when he can stay healthy. He had some injury concerns last year, and this team has some pieces on defense as well. So we'll see what's going to happen here. They've had a number of transfers as well and struggled the past few seasons. So 2 teams, this game won't even necessarily be a gauge of where they're at moving forward, because both teams could very much be in flux throughout the entirety of the season as they're finding their footholds within their respective conferences going forward. Last year, on the opening week, we saw Florida State and Notre Dame go head-to-head in a game that went to overtime. The Irish pulled out, and they went on to have a double-digit win season, while Florida State struggled and did not make a bowl game. But that was still very competitive in the opening weekend. Regardless of how their seasons go, this game on Sunday should be a real fun one. And Monday, 8 o'clock ESPN, we will have the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets hosting number 4 Clemson. Last year, this was a game where Georgia Tech had a 4th and goal, multiple attempts to score right on the goal line or within a few yards there, and Clemson prevented them from doing so and was able to pull out a win. Otherwise, Clemson could have started the year 1-3, I believe. That they had a real rough start last season, and the Yellow Jackets had every opportunity to beat them, and instead they turned around and finished the season 3-9. So Clemson will certainly look to blow them out this year, as they've hopefully figured some things out. Now, quarterback Jeff Sims, who's a sophomore for Georgia Tech, he can really flip the ball. He's fun to watch, and he'll probably be there for another season or 2, but I think he's a joy to watch. And it's not a team that's going to do a whole lot of winning, but you'll get a chance to watch them on Monday night. There is buzz coming out of Clemson that 5-star true freshman Cade Klubnik may push to start sooner rather than later, quarterback over DJ Ungale, who struggled last year, throwing more interceptions than touchdown, and just had a very rough time. That probably won't make a difference here in the opener against the Yellow Jackets. They could split time. DJ would still start, I presume, even if the decision is that Cade may very well be the starter moving forward, especially if he performs better. But I'd expect some kind of split time or time between the two if this does indeed turn into a blowout. And keep an eye on the defensive line for the Tigers. Best in the country, multiple guys that should end up in the NFL, and that could very well be what pushes them into the playoffs, other than that quarterback position, if they're able to get DJ to really improve, if we see some improvement there, or if Cade is really a difference maker for the Tigers. So those are our 2 quick games there. Sunday, 7:30 ABC, Florida State at LSU, and Monday, 8 o'clock ESPN, number 4 Clemson at Georgia Tech. So that was your Welch's Watch Guide, taking a little time on the top games in each viewing window. And here are your top watches altogether, filling in a few categories that I have here, helping you guide your viewing habits. Starting with the top weekday watch. And we have several great options here, primarily on Thursday, West Virginia at number 17 Pittsburgh, and Penn State at Purdue. Unfortunately, those will be being played at the exact same time. I like the Big Ten matchup here but it might be a little bit slower to watch. And the West Virginia-Pittsburgh backyard brawl getting back underway for the first time in a decade will be a little bit more exciting to watch, I think. So depending on your flavor there, Penn State, Purdue, I think, has a little bit more weighing on what could happen further down in the Big Ten between these two teams, although they're in different divisions. And West Virginia, Pittsburgh, playing in different conferences, don't necessarily have as high a stakes. So if you like a little bit more exciting gameplay, I think West Virginia, Pittsburgh will be your option there, the better one. If you have to choose one team to be on your TV at that time, I'll be going Penn State at Purdue. And that is on Fox at 8 o'clock this upcoming Thursday. Must-watch game of the week if you're sitting down to watch one game, and I tend to focus on the Saturday slate, of course, for this, which logically makes sense. And, of course, we have a lot of options here. Oregon at Georgia is obviously one of the big matchups. Cincinnati at Arkansas, I said earlier, would be my pick, and I've already changed my mind on that several times. And Notre Dame at Ohio State is obviously going to be at the top of everyone's mind, with a number 5 on the road at number 2 here, and Ohio State losing last year when Oregon hit the road. But again, the spread is 17 points on the Georgia-Oregon game. It's large on the Ohio State-Notre Dame game as well. Arkansas-Cincinnati is going to be an excellent game. And I've circled back around to Utah at Florida, which is very strange considering one team is unranked and one is in the top 10. But this could have great implications for both of these teams. Utah could potentially be in the playoffs, and regardless of whether it's a conference game or not, they really can't afford a trip up. And Florida is an unknown going into this season. Are they going to hover around bowl eligibility? Could they press for 8 or 9 wins in second place in the SEC East behind Georgia? Could Georgia possibly take a loss this year? And we have a different team winning that division. This could be a great barometer. These are two teams that could potentially, we could really get a good gauge on where these teams are at here. Whereas in Notre Dame, Ohio State, if Ohio State does blow out the Irish, maybe we don't quite get a good feel with where the Irish are at yet, and they could still win 9 or 10 games. Maybe they're in the playoff picture. Maybe they're not at all. Ohio State's defense is going to be the big key for this season. Maybe we don't get an accurate representation of where it's at yet. Maybe Notre Dame isn't a great test to see where they're at. It's just I'm not sure we're going to get a good gauge there either way, despite the fact that it's a top 5 matchup. If Oregon had a great showing in the game against Georgia, it would bode well for that squad, but they're shuffling a number of different pieces around, so not sure how they're going to look in that game there. In Cincinnati, Arkansas, I think is going to be excellent. But again, Cincinnati moving a bunch of pieces around, not sure about the quarterback position. If they did play well against Arkansas, I think they could be very telling in their future. But again, they're not going to play a team that should really be anywhere in their realm the rest of the year. So, but Utah and Florida, both challenging schedules, and could both potentially have a lot at stake here, and this should be a good football game. Two great quarterbacks, Cam Rising, one of the best in the Pac-12, and Anthony Richardson now has the quarterback position to himself there in Florida. Obviously, a true college football fan will be channel flipping between Notre Dame, Ohio State, and Utah, Florida, and be able to catch pieces of both. But if you have to sit down and watch one football game this weekend, I would say number 7 Utah at Florida on ESPN at 7 o'clock. Now, my next category, Audible, is a very special spot. It's when a particular time slot, a particular slate of games all go sideways, and you're looking for a good quality game as a backup. Not necessarily something you'd watch otherwise, but something you have to watch because the other top games in that particular time are not worth watching anymore. They're blowouts, they're too slow, they're too something. They're just not worth your time anymore. Now, the afternoon and the evening slate are obviously populated with a lot of options. The noon slate is going to be just a slog for this Saturday. Obviously, I've highlighted North Carolina at Appalachian State, and number 3, NC State at East Carolina. as the top two on the slate there. Other than that, we have a lot of matchups for kind of middling teams at FCS level opponents, and some of our top teams, Michigan, Texas A&M, playing teams they should absolutely destroy. So it's tough to find any more teams to highlight or games to flip to on that slate. So I'm actually going to cheat quite a bit and go back to the well on the Thursday slate. Again, Penn State's playing at Purdue, West Virginia's playing at Pittsburgh, but also in that 7 o'clock slot, I briefly mentioned Central Michigan playing at number 12, Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State has at times been sluggish on offense the past couple of years. They're just expected to get back to the level they were last season. Jim Knowles is no longer their defensive coordinator, of course, because he shifted over to Ohio State. Now, Central Michigan has some decent players back there in the secondary. They have a solid running back in Lou Nichols III, who led the country in rushing yards last season. Did you know that? Led the country in rushing yards, 1,848 yards, 5.4 yards per carry, 16 touchdowns. They also return quarterback Daniel Richardson, who threw for 2,600 yards, 24 touchdowns, only 6 picks. And have a good chunk of the offensive line back. They were actually 18th nationally in rush defense, although a good chunk of that was to the benefit of playing opponents in the MAC conference, of course. But this is a solid MAC team, a good MAC team. And these two teams, many years back, split the two meetings they played previously in 2015 and 2016 when the Chippewas pulled the upset at the very end against the Cowboys a few years back. So may I suggest, if the West Virginia-Pittsburgh game is a blowout one way or the other, presumably Pittsburgh's way, if Purdue-Penn State tends to lean one direction, may I suggest flipping on FS1 and checking out Oklahoma State and the Chippewas of Central Michigan at 7 o'clock on Thursday night as your audible pick for this week. I don't expect an upset. I don't want to be one of those folks who's constantly suggesting a dozen upsets all the time and waves their hand when one happens. But it could be a game that is closer than the 21-point spread indicates. The next category is underrated, your underrated game of the week, and that I gave to Mississippi State hosting Memphis at 7:30 on ESPNU. That is on Saturday. Of course, Mississippi State's on my list of one of the top 10 teams in the country as far as watchability. Not necessarily that they'll be in the national championship hunt, not necessarily that that'll lead to double-digit wins, but as far as are they in good games every week? Do they have great matchups? Do they have fun players to watch? Are they fun to watch go up and down the field? Are they playing teams relative to their competitive level? Or they might beat the tar out of the Memphis Tigers, and they might be in a team that's at a relatively close competitive level. I think they're a few steps up, but this will be a punch down in terms of opponents, although Seth Heineken last year for the Tigers as a freshman threw for over 3,300 yards with a 25-8 touchdown to interception ratio, and there will be a lot of ball throwing in this game. So it should be entertaining. This team could be, for Mississippi State, could be around 500 this year, but they'll have an opportunity to win here in this underrated matchup. On the other hand, if the Tigers win, maybe we hear a little bit more about Seth Heineken moving forward. My next category is check-in. So take a peek at this game between commercial breaks, and that's in the late night slate as well. I just have a lot of these as we get into the football season more. I'll be able to spread these out a bit, and we'll have more, a richer depth of games. But on the ACC network, 8 o'clock, that's the Louisville at Syracuse game. I think that's worth taking a peek at, seeing how Malik Cunningham works, of course, the star quarterback there for Louisville. And on the other side of the ball for the Syracuse Orange, who are star-deprived these days, one of the top running backs in the country there, of course, in Sean Tucker. So although neither of these teams are playoff squads or winning the ACC in all likelihood, that's worth a check-in to see where those two players are at. The next category is small screen. I ideally going to a game between two non-Power 5 teams, although if that's really sparse, it could go to a game between a non-Power 5 team and one Power 5 squad. But this week we have a perfect one, and that's the number 24 ranked Houston Cougars playing the UTSA Roadrunners on the CBS Sports Network in the 3:30 afternoon slot. If you have an opportunity to watch some of that game between the Oregon-Georgia game and the Arkansas-Cincinnati game, it should be an excellent showcase of two of the top squads in non-Power 5 conferences, as Houston should have an opportunity to win the AAC, the American Conference this year, where they could potentially rematch against the Cincinnati Bearcats. And UTSA, coming off an excellent season last year after a number of terrible 1, 2, 3 win seasons, returns their quarterback and a great high-pace offense. This could be a fireworks show. Might be one of the best games on the whole day, as it turns out. So this is definitely worth a peek-see here. Number 24 Houston at UTSA, CBS Sports Network, 3:30. And finally, late night snack. What's your top late night game? That's easy. It's the 10:30 ESPN Boise State at Oregon State. The Broncos and the Beavers, one of the top teams in the Mountain West Conference, playing what's presumably a middling team in the Pac-12, and which should be a fairly competitive game there out west. So cook yourself up a little late night snack after a tough day of watching some great football. Get your activities done earlier in the morning and the afternoon with a light slate there, and enjoy your afternoon through your late evening here. Of course, we will have the Sunday game with Labor Day going on here in week 1, as we do now with Florida State and LSU. And the Monday, Clemson, Georgia Tech, so it's not quite a nightcap or a weekend cap, I guess, in this particular case. But be sure to check Broncos, Beavers, ESPN 10:30. And that's about it for this week. Happy Labor Day. Thanks for listening. Enjoy your watching. And I will speak at you later.
All my blessings, all my blessings. All my blessings, 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 all my blessings.
I need my blessings every penny. Daily counting every single one, I'm seeing plenty. Level up and watch that beat turn into a